back in the gallery, and I'm delighted to introduce UCLA's own Tiffany Barber, Assistant Professor of Art History. And as I believe it was covered this morning, Jerry and I, from the very beginning, said we want new perspectives, we want young perspectives, we want different perspectives. So we were totally delighted when Professor Barber said, instead of me presenting, why don't I bring in my students? So she is now going to introduce her amazing team of students.
Yes, hi everyone. As Catherine is Kathy. Okay, I'm like, as Kathy said, I am Dr. Tiffany Barber. I teach in the art history department here. My title is Assistant Professor of African American Art, but I'm actually, my specialty is actually 20th and 21st century visual art, new media, and performance of the Black diaspora, mostly looking at the Black Atlantic world, but also starting to branch out to other places. And I'm currently teaching a graduate seminar titled The Idea of Black Art, where my students and I think about the intellectual history of Black art and Black aesthetics over the long 20th century. So we've been reading lots of authors, and one of their major assignments for the term, major assessments for the term, was to write a exhibition review that put this exhibition in conversation with Together in Time at the Hammer, as well as the Afro-Atlantic History Show at LACMA. So I'm not sure you'll get a sense of that per se, because we pulled out the Myrlande Constant specificity for this presentation, but I just want to echo that this is definitely a multiplicity of voices represented in this presentation. We have specialists in art history who are coming from completely different vantage points, early modern South Asia, Latinx art, and we have a theater director, a musicologist, Black studies in fashion. Who am I missing? I think that's it. Okay, so my students are here. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes.
Starting with David?
Yes, I'm David H. Parker, they, them pronouns. I am the theater director from CFT. Happy to be here.
My name is Maya, she, her, and I'm in the art history department.
I'm Martin, he, him. I am in the ethnomusicology department at school.
My name is Ezekiel, and I use he, him pronouns. I am in the art history department as well.
And my name is Gina Lewis, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in the African American Studies department at UCLA.
So we put together collaboratively a little kind of like meandering through the galleries, and we'll start with it being in here, and I'll let my students take it away.
Okay, so I am going to start us with these three photographs right here. So this retrospective not only showcases the 30-year-long career of Constant, charting her engagements with figures of voodoo, with Catholic, and even with Hindu divinity, but it also importantly carves out an intergenerational lineage of creation and labor that exists firmly outside of traditional art-making spaces. In a powerful curatorial choice, the retrospective does not begin with one of Constant's dazzling beaded textiles, but instead with three small photographs of Constant's workshop taken by American photographer Maggie Sever in 2010. In one photograph, this one right here, Constant weaves beads into the underside of a canvas alongside her three children, who have since taken leadership roles in her studio. The photograph resonates with Constant's own beading trading with her mother in a Port-au-Prince factory, and quietly reminds viewers that while her forthcoming works are being shown in a white-walled or purple-walled museum, Constant's work is not grown from academic and artistic institutions entirely. Her reinvention of Haitian textile arts is intimately familial, intergenerational, and laborious. Okay, so we're going to go to another work now. her involving investment and the impact of the sacred on everyday life. Her textile, and forgive my pronunciation, but her textile, Erzuli Freda, displays a portrait of Erzuli Freda, the Loire of lavish femininity, who is curiously modeled after the Catholic figure of Mater Dolorosa, the Virgin Mary in mourning. Constant finds power in claiming Catholic saints as voodoo's own Loire, hearkening to the Church's repression of voodoo since the 18th century, as well as voodoo's non-exclusive disposition towards other faiths. The portrait contains gold and pearl-lined accessories of the feminine, perfume bottles, plush chairs, flowers, fruits, and jewelry, which recontextualize Mater Dolorosa's well-known sorrowful expression with her insatiability as the Loire. Alongside equally powerful portraits and narratives of the divine, Erzuli Freda represents a practice that is as ornate as it is historically and iconographically rich, intervening in Voodoo, Catholic, and Haitian aesthetic histories. The god of creation, centered over a grand feast in celebration of its reverence. The religious influence in everyday life is present here in this piece, in the storytelling. The joy and celebration is translated through the ornate story in the center of the fabric, but also in its framework for the border, as we heard earlier. This drappo is framed with an ornate, multi-layered, textured cutout fabric that's adorned with dense sateen tassels. And within this thick border, black and red sequins likely hold symbolism as they are specific and color-coordinated choices in the border. Other pieces of Constant don't always employ that coordinating fabric along the frame. We see glittered bowls of fruit, iridescent pearl teapots and dishes, champagne-colored candelabras, and sequined margaritas, if you will, or cocktails, with a twist to call attention to the grandiosity of celebration, suggesting that this feast is a call for one's finest. We can make observations about how religious practice is actualized for everyday Haitians. And while a specific holiday or observance isn't referenced specifically, we can imagine this as a large celebration. Moving inwards to the details, it's notable to call attention to each figure or spirit, as we heard earlier, as another highlight of this piece. And it's an example of Constant's attention to detail and fine beadwork. This lively celebration calls for vivid and iridescent dress and decor, as we can see the 22 figures that are featured here, which are very well dressed. The beading and the sequins naturally enhances the feel of their attire due to the natural textile parallel, as obviously the use of beading and sequins can convey gowns and other ornate dress. We see gown-like dresses, colored head wraps, men in cowboy hats, and dress emerges as another piece of everyday life where celebration occurs and is recognized. Community here is also on display. Another notable material addition is the use of cowrie shells, which we can see along the coastline, which add another connection to African diaspora culture in this densely cultural piece. That's inclusive of Haitian tradition and divinity. Constant's signature, as well as the signature Haitian flag, occupy the corner of this piece, which is again a vibrant display of abundance enhanced by the nature of the fabric and its material choice. And the magnitude of this piece, which again suggests the overflow, is demonstrated in its scale, which is approximately 8 feet wide.
To the right. The figurative depictions in Constant's drappo poignantly express individual experiences and spiritualities in renderings that are loose and unburdened by precision, as if drawn freely by hand with much more concern for storytelling than representational realism. These figures are often animated in the action of narrative that convey rituals, ceremonies, and festivals that are central to voodoo, ancestral religious practices, or historical events of Haitian independence and collective resolve. In Rara 2020, we see the scene of a carnivalesque festival during Lent, where percussion, instruments, and horns are being played, figures dance and entertain around a fire in brightly colored costumes, and bottles of clarin, liquor derived from sugarcane, are consumed. The setting is framed by a pattern constructed from congas, snare drums, shakers, and sticks, and the curved tassels along the border suggest a proscenium for performance. Catholic references and imagery arise throughout Constant's work and in the visual language of the drapeau, often in the form of saints and maternal archetypes, such as the reference to St. George in, forgive me, Ogu Fare Negrete for Nago Jupiter Tonere, 2004, and the crowned mother and child in Ezeli Balion, 2005. And then next, I'd just like to look at this piece on the wall right here, which is Myrlande Constant, tu la vois. Drums also appear in Myrlande Constant, tu l'amour, circa 2000, which depicts rituals of death and transition in a scene filled with figures, living, dead, spirits. We see graves, a Haitian flag, and a sacred mapao tree with an eye at the center of the image, bridging the horizon between the ground and the sky, life and afterlife. This work is framed with a floral tapestry and borders of pearls that juxtapose the incandescence of the tree's leaves and the angel's wings. The gold atmosphere that surrounds the mapao tree evokes an aura of mystic and interstitial space that transcends the lives and burials happening in the foreground. The visual results of Constant's process are shimmering, delicate tapestries overflowing with layers of texture and color that shift with each perspective, refracting light in unpredictable ways that contrast saturated colors and sheens, frames of tassels and satin, and patterns of shapes woven together in rhythmic motion. Themes of healing, divinity, history, and community unfold in the stories and portraits of Constant's reflective practice and radiate in her works.
And then we can redirect our attention to our last room. And here we have something that Professor Daniels before us that went into wonderfully intricate detail on, and I'm just going to sort of pull some of her notes back. In Haiti, Mardi 12 January 2010, Haiti, Tuesday, January 12, 2010, where other artists may directly engage in this larger than life-size subject and engage the tributaries within that lead to a revelation of identity. Constant weaves her own tapestry of ceremonies and rituals. She quote, incorporates her philosophical propositions on the nature of the divine and its impact on the human experiences, depicting everyday life coexisting with the sacred and the transcendent. In this piece that presents itself as sort of a crown jewel in this particular collection, we see a hazard of tectonic proportions knocking the monotonous daily regimens of Haitian life off equilibrium, leaving the city of Port-au-Prince a, quote, cemetery. In its full-scale proportions, Constant has made it difficult to determine the minutiae of the intricately woven patterns, and instead the composition presents a bit like a Mardi Gras-inspired celebratory gesture, and it is only when viewed up close that Constant's intentions are revealed. Haitians that have had their lives unfortunately and brutally, prematurely slain by the weight of buildings that their spirits now dance upon, Vodou spirits playing a clarion call of their brass horns, fellow Haitians mourning the gravity of a community gone asunder. Perhaps one can only truly understand the trauma of others and how a broken community heals when the scope of the individuals are fully understood. In the realm of accessibility, each of the aforementioned pieces feels as though their progenitors attempt to lower the barrier for entry on the subject matters, at least in a vacuum. And speaking to the class status of the viewer, Constant pushes the boundaries of who can teeter precariously on their tiptoes to see the edges of the exhibit, to peer into the aesthetics of her storytelling. The drapeau's menagerie of bright colors and youthful expressions and gestures may attract impressionable eyes of all ages.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, we have one
Thinking of one more.
Oh.
I believe.
This one, oh, nice. Yeah, right?
All right, so the English translation of this piece is titled Patience Lend a Hand to Your Mother. This piece evokes divine feminine as well as cultural legacy and pride through this beaded portraiture of a woman, which is often thought of as Constant's self-portrait. She hasn't denied that claim. Haiti's coat of arms, which is also featured here. Independence holds strong legacy for Haitian identity, present in this centralized figure. A departure from Constant's drapeau that often includes many figures and storylines, here she centers the woman, or mother, calling on her community to honor her for Haiti and for the progress of the nation. This piece symbolized the call action that her community can connect through the pride of Haiti's flag and its colors. Now the woman here is well dressed and she's adorned down to her beaded sandals and her painted toes. She has painted fingernails and painted toes. She's wearing a head wrap that also bears the Haitian flag's coat of arms. Both of her sleeves and the dress trim are detailed and adorned through Constant's beadwork. She has bold earrings and red lipstick and is flocked by 2 golden birds which appear to look like doves. And this framed pattern is also significant. The patterns are reminiscent of either like a Middle Eastern floral or an Aztec damask. And it's framed again densely with maroon and golden threaded but loosely knotted fringe that gives more of that color coordinated or more succinct color story that gives all the vibrancy to its central figures, which is the mother and the Haitian flag.
Not only visualize the role of the divine feminine community today, but also the role they have played throughout Haiti's history.
Ossangi Kwekwe Malo features the revolutionary leader Toussaint Louverture in a blue military uniform on horseback. Kosovo blends Western equestrian portraiture with aspects of voodoo. Practitioners of voodoo compare the Loire descending into the body of a human, much like a rider mounting a horse. In this case, Louverture is noticeably much larger than the horse. Rendered in hieratic scale, he appears to be possessed or empowered by the Loire. Constants will portray the divine as revolutionary forces behind Haiti's past and present. And if we move over here really quick.
So the Loire meshed in the lines with the visuals of the family. There's a movie on tour that features Loire by the same name. Here, the cloak wears a crown, much like a child in a crown. They have these halos that surround them and rays of light that radiate from them, very much so emphasizing their divine nature.
She's commonly associated with working-class motherhood, which is another example of how the divine are both representative of Constant's community and very much so part of it.
So I'm going to end our talk with this last work. A somewhat small and perhaps unassuming portrait hangs in the final room, titled Caffeine Blonde. Nestled inside 3 adorned borders sits a dark-skinned woman sewing a textile, much like Constant herself in her own Port-au-Prince-based atelier during her interview with Natasha Giafferi-Dombre, stage director of Staging the Invisible. The quiet image is dedicated to Caffeine Blonde, the daughter of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and a seamstress who sewed the Haiti's flag in 1803 following the country's independence. After witnessing the monumental, lush textiles punctuating the exhibition, the portrait recalls the lineage of women flag makers and seamstresses that marked Constant's practice, reorienting us and perhaps grounding us back into the first photographs that we saw in this exhibition. The image of Caffeine Blonde urges viewers not to simply stand and gaze at the monumentality and detail of Constant's textiles, but to meditate or to meditate on the intricate intergenerational exchange of knowledge and skill that has made her practice possible, as well as the lineage that she herself has birthed in her own workshop. Symbolism and iconography of voodoo cosmology runs through the work and threads the Drapo together as a testament to Constant's ancestral heritage, the Loa voodoo deities, her mother who taught her, and the community of women who create the flags alongside her. A quote from Constant, displayed in the wall of the first room, echoes here, quote, "After God and the Loa, it is my mother. If you don't get that, you don't get me," unquote.
Today we'll look like the following. We're basically going to be enjoying being taken into an interpretation of works of Myrlande Constant through a number of people with very specific expertise. So we're going to enjoy the works through their lens. And everyone has a stool, so we're going to move the stools as we move through different parts of this beautiful exhibition that Kathy and Jerry labored for years. And there's a beautiful publication, and this exhibition is the result of their wonderful work. So with that, I'm going to invite Jerry.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you all, and so excited that we're able to do this. So this is a symposium on the arts of Myrlande Constant. And I'm so happy that you all were able to join us today. And as Ian said, I'm Jerry Philogene, one of the co-curators of this exhibition. Kathy is getting herself together and will be joining us later on this afternoon. And when Kathy and I were planning this exhibition, we were, part of our conversation was definitely programming. We were very interested in making sure that we had a catalog that would be able to bring together curators, writers, artists who would explore Constant's work in a variety of different ways. It was very, very important for us to enter into conversation about her work in a dynamic and different perspectives. And we feel confident that the catalog has done that. So if you don't have a copy of it, please get a copy of the catalog. It is fantastic, it's beautiful. So we really appreciate that. And we also want to make sure that the conversation today is equally dynamic, equally generative. And that's why we chose to actually not do a traditional panel, where you have people talk about the work and then we're not really seeing the work, we're seeing slides. And here we actually are going to be talking with folk and hearing their brilliance and the ways in which they're thinking and theorizing about Myrlande Constant's work in such different ways. So being part of the gallery is so important, and walking through the space is equally important for us as well. And we're honored today to have many gifted and amazing friends and colleagues to join us in this conversation. Our first panel is a panel that I will moderate. And if you want to even call it a panel for moderation, not really, because it's really more of a conversation. I'd really like it to be a conversation where folks are sharing with each other their thoughts and ideas. So we have three amazing, amazing scholars. The first is Myrlande Constant, who's a Haitian-Canadian American writer and Guggenheim Fellow and the HBA Chair of Humanities at Scripps College. Professor Constant is an author of several academic monographs, including Framing Silence, Revolutionary Novels of Haitian Women. That was one of actually the first books that I read that really helped me have a language to think about Haitian women, Haitian creativity in relationship to visual arts. So thank you so much for that, because we need that kind of scholarship. We also have joining us today is Gina Ulisi. Gina is a wonderful, wonderful performer and a self-described post-Zora interventionalist. Is that correct? Interventionist, thank you, my friend. A Haitian-American feminist, artist, and anthropologist. Her work has been so generative in also giving us language to think about space, place, and being. In particular, her work is grounded in what she calls assemblage, a way to think about the gathering of people, the gathering of ideas, and the gathering of spirits. And this is the space in which we can actually see this. This is the space in which we will see this. So thank you, Gina, for joining us. And Gina's work, a wonderful collection of op-eds and essays called Why Haiti Needs New Narratives, a post-quake chronicle, has been instrumental in my work in theorizing visual narratives and the ways in which Haiti actually comes to be, but also the way in which Haiti is visualized. So that work that Gina has produced has been so instrumental for us Catherine and I for thinking about this exhibition. And our other speaker is Patrick Polk, over there. Patrick is Senior Curator of Caribbean and Latin American Popular Arts and a lecturer at UCLA's Department of World Arts and Culture and Dance. He's also the Senior Curator at Fowler. And Patrick has produced numerous amazing exhibitions and catalog essays that have also been generative in us thinking about the idea of Vodou de la Peau, but also thinking about the spirits in relationship to the visual arts. And Patrick has been a wonderful, quiet facilitator, guider, mentor, and supporter of this exhibition. So we thank you very much for that. But I wouldn't be able to do any of this if it wasn't for my dear friend Catherine, but also for Amy Landau and her amazing support for this exhibition, but also for the symposium. And of course, her amazing team, Lee Carter, Jennifer Perales-Garcia, Hannah Yu, Alexis Edge, Francesca Alvarezzi, I'm mispronouncing, and Jonathan Glover. We've had amazing support, amazing community bringing this together. So I thank you one and all for all the work that you have done. So please join me in thanking not only our presenters, but also our wonderful team. Yes,
Does it matter where I stand?
No, wherever you want.
Okay. It'll be easiest, I think, for me to stand here with respect to the mural. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to have my little cheat notes to speak a little bit. Of course, I'm Myrlande Constant, and I wanted to thank Catherine Smith and Géry Philogène. Thank you, Géry, for the introduction this morning. And everyone at the Fowler, including Amy, Aaron, Alexis, Hannah, Francesca, everybody that I've been in touch with, and those that I have not been in touch with, thank you so much. I came and saw the exhibit when it opened, and I was really blown away. I had seen some of Myrlande Constant's work in other places, like Venice Biennale and at LACMA this fall, but I'd never seen so many pieces gathered together. And I was struck by Catherine and Géry's introduction to the pieces and the idea that we really need to think about them as more of a drapeau. They are drapeau, but also as a part of a tradition of arts, not only in Haiti, but the world over. And in particular, when Géry talked about thinking about some of these pieces as maybe a conversation that, with tapestry, thinking about tapestry and how tapestry has been executed all over the world. And I came to this piece, Haïti, mardi 23 janvier 2010. I was really struck by the veracity of that comment. And I wanted to, when I was invited to speak today, to put some of my work on the earthquake, particularly in my novel, One Storm, One Thunder, in conversation. So my presentation today will be, I think, a sort of weaving, in the tradition of the work that Constant does, and with a concept that I talk about elsewhere called la co-consciousness, where artists of African descent, but particularly of Haitian descent, are in conversation with one another, part of a la coup, of a larger consciousness, of bringing together the ancestors, the spirits, and ourselves as one. I should have started by saying honneur, respect. And I also wanted to start with an invocation that I started the novel with, and it is an invocation to Legba. So I'll start here. Atibo Legba, ouvri pot la pou mwen. Papa Legba, ouvri pot la pou mwen. Ouvri pot la pou mwen kab entre, pou mwen kab toune. Atibo Legba, open the door for me. Papa Legba, open the door for me. Open the door so that I can enter, so that I can return. And I began the novel there, partly to invite readers to be part of a sacred space. And when I came through the show, I saw the video, the conversation with Constant, where she talked about where she began her own work, and that when she was a very young artist, she hadn't perceived yet that she needed to start every piece with Legba. And I thought, oh my goodness, I started a novel with Legba, but I hadn't
actually, I hadn't had the consciousness, the complete consciousness to think of why I was doing it. And so I was struck with the conversation that I was beginning to have with Constant. And to bring you to the mural, when I was examining it more closely, you see that in the middle there is a cross, which is also the peristyle for me. I see it as the peristyle of the Vaudou Oudroit. And for me, l'Ébat is focused here in this red candle, knowing that red is the color of l'Ébat. But also, when you venerate l'Ébat, you give him spirits, especially rum. And then you see here the bottle that is pouring out. So one of the things I'd like to do as I talk through Weststorm in conjunction with the mural is to do a kind of spiralist reading. So those of you familiar with Franck Etienne, the work of Kayema Glover on Franck Etienne, know that a lot of Haitian literature and conceptualization is around this idea of spiralism, that there's a break in space-time continuum, and that in the way that we can see that Constant puts all of these images together, it is meant to reflect a non-linear sense of time. So not just the way the catastrophe of the earthquake broke space-time, but this is also a way of thinking about Haitian space. But at the center, she has that veneration taking place. And then I'll take you through in a kind of spiralist way, so not in an ordered way, but weaving through the piece. So the next thing that I notice is that bottle of spirits or rum is spilling over into what looks to be a basket of goods. And the basket of goods is just there in space, but for me it symbolizes the importance of the market women. And if you move into the lower right space, there are at least two market women that I can identify here. And for me, the gros bleu, the blue of and which could also signify an Erzuli or a Yemaya figure. But the fact that they have the kerchiefs and that they are wearing, the skirts that you see women wear in the marketplace, for me is about those market women and how she is centralizing the common person. So in the novel Weststorm with Thunder, a market woman, Malou, bookends the novel. She begins and ends the novel. And the novel is told in 10 voices, so 10 narrators of different ages, different backgrounds, socioeconomic. But the market woman really is who is holding everyone together. And she's also the person who, in Haitian culture, holds everything together. So I wanted to speak about Malou, or speak through her voice, and then I'll bring you back into the mural, because there are some details in the mural that are consonant with her voice. So Malou tells us about her experience of the earthquake, and she says this: I watched. That's what old market women do. We watch. But this time, the lot of us market women sprang to action, even as our bones creaked for lack of cartilage and oil. Like the others on the street, we used anything in hand we could find, useless things like spoons and forks, the metal ends of umbrellas, as if our puny things, our fingernails, could move, all that. Only the lucky were saved. Being lucky meant simply that you were closer to the surface, or that fewer things blocked the way to being found. We heard people on their cell phones all up and down the street, begging frantically for help, giving directions to where they thought they were beneath the rubble within the rooms of their houses. Phones rang, and we heard people answer them, then fewer and fewer voices. The tinny, persistent ringing of cell phone tones, different songs rising like wind from underground with no answer. We heard our own voices screaming at each other, asking for help, not knowing what to do, faces covered with dust and sweat, and other things later to be determined. What to do? There was nothing to do but to scream, try anything, flail our hands, scratch at the earth like my chickens when they get confused because their fresh laid eggs disappear one by one, and still they lay more. Try anything, and still it's too little. After the earth rose and split open, yes, I saw angels walking, but there had also been dust, white dust everywhere, caking all objects and every moving thing. The dust came from the concrete crumbling to pieces as buildings flattened, but there were also other things mixed in, blood and bones.
Had I mistaken the walking dead for angels, survivors stumbling through their debris with the same white flakes covering their bodies from head to toe that covered mine? And so back to the mural. When I first saw the mural, what struck me was this figure here. And the beads provide, this sense of a whiteness that was covering people's bodies. And then as you move through, you see a man who is trying to save someone, a house collapsing. And then moving to this area, you see people doing the work of trying to save others. And then also a man here, carrying the dead away in a wheelbarrow. And so in all of the space, you see this layering, but I was really struck by the fact that there is this sense of conveying to the viewer what she saw at the time, that dust covering everyone, the layers that can never really be recovered, and the coexisting with that debris, not just at the time, but for many, many months after. And so then I started thinking about another aspect of the earthquake, which is, if you'll remember, right after, days after, we heard evangelists say things like Haiti had made a pact with the devil with reference to voodoo. We heard people say within Haiti that those to be blamed were the people in the M society, queer people, and particularly lesbians. And this was also said, not so much the evangelism part, because of the history of missionary work in Haiti, but about the queer society. This was also said in the late 1880s, I believe, after a large earthquake, did the same kind of damage in the Cap-Haïtien area. And so when I was working on the novel, and this is something I try to do throughout my work, I think many of us do who work on Haiti, is always to infuse a sense of a Vodou spirituality in the work, because it is what animates us and what keeps us going. And you see this in all of Constant's work, is the importance of Vodou to being able to continue. And so what strikes, I think, any viewer of a mural immediately is the presence of Baron Samedi and Grande Brigitte, who are here at the top of the tapestry, or as she would call it, a painting. And so in the novel, what I tried to do was to create some characters, Sonia and Dieudonné, who are part of the M Society. Sonia is a prostitute in one of the large hotels which collapsed, and Dieudonné, her best friend, is a fixer, and they have an interesting moment with Guédé and Baron Samedi, which I'll read from next. So Sonia is speaking of Dieudonné. He had known that something was wrong, was going to go wrong. He told me later that he could sniff it in the air, a too clean smell that comes in the minutes before a hurricane or a thunderstorm, when the skies are clear and crackling with electric energy, before the winds pick up and snap fronds clean from swaying palms, whose rhizomes grasp the earth like tentacular fists, as if fearing to be uprooted by the squalls. A too clean smell, where there should have been only the usual stench and smoke from the burning of garbage heaps gathered at the edges of the street and set to flame there before children make their way to school. Not that such order could be counted on, but people tried. He was confirmed in his suspicion that things were off when he saw the short, pear-shaped, walnut-skinned man in the dark suit and hat, with a white shirt straining across the reach of his bulging, pregnant-like belly, sitting at the bar a few feet away from the kidney-shaped pool. It wasn't the man he told me was his cousin, Richard, another character, who was in town only for a few days and who had said wasn't anyone we needed to worry about. Richard thought only about himself, according to Dieudonné. He was an important man overseas and didn't have time to think about the trouble he could cause others, but like most men, he caused trouble along his way anyway. No, the man in question was not Richard. No, nor was it Leopold, another distant relation whom I knew only from the way he raked his eyes over my body every time he saw me, attempting with his gaze to penetrate through skin and bone, as if my soul would release itself to him and only him. No, not Leopold. The man eyeing me was much older but voracious in his attention. He stared at me as if I was the round, reddish-green apple he was avariciously biting through that morning. He held the apple akimbo in one hand preciously between bites, while the other hand rested ceremoniously on the head of a cane shaped to resemble a duck or a swan, with two eyes made of red stones, one on either side of the head. The animal head of the cane peered through the gaps between the man's plump fingers. The sight of it was chilling, as if it might turn into a snake at any moment and strike us dead. I saw Dieudonné shiver from across the bar when later the man lit up a thin cigar. He gave me a look across the counter, and I could see in his eyes that we were thinking the same thing. Guédé, c'est Guédé qu'il a, the god of death. We read each other's thoughts. Dieudonné kept watch on the man as if to protect me from imminent danger. But the man never moved from his seat, never sent over rum or wine, not even water. Even later, as we were attempting to get out of the city on motorbike, the hotel fallen, the roads blocked, buildings that we had known all of our lives, now in pieces, neither dead nor living, accounted for, we wondered if we should have done more to acknowledge that death itself had entered the doors of the hotel. Baron Sandy, the man with a cane, if we should have given a warning to others. How we had made it out was still unclear. We had been in the elevator with Leopold only minutes before, stepped out into the lobby, then had decided to escape the hotel to get some air anywhere. And then, the minutes we reached Dieudonné's motorbike parked under a tree, some 50 feet away from the winding road that led up the mountain to the hotel, the ground beneath us swayed and undulated like a carpet being shaken in the air to clear it of crumbs after a meal. We were the crumbs, lifting, weightless. We reached for each other's hands as we rose up in the air. We heard a great thunder, and then suddenly the hotel had risen, then fallen in on itself like a cake of many layers. We reached for the tree against which we had left the motorbike to steady ourselves, wrapped our arms around it, the motorbike on its side at our feet, but our feet still there, on the ground. Everything around us heaved, covering us in a heavy coat of dust. So back to this imagery of the dust, the people, dealing with the dead, the collapse. But again, Baron Sandy, and what really struck me most, and I see it not only here but in some of the other pieces of Constant, is that, for someone like me who was born under the Duvalier regime, Baron Sandy is no longer associated with the regime. Now Baron Sandy is with the people. He is on his knees. He is an intercessor like Legba between the living and the dead, and he is weeping with his children because of what they have suffered. He is no longer this figure that is bringing suffering, but he is in fact with Legba, trying to work with the dead and lamenting the dead, as is Ranouji, and as we see the angels above weeping and clarining together with the people. And that's what really struck me the most about this piece, is the reconciliation, that is brought back into Vodou and representation of Vodou in the work. And finally, how to conclude. There's a great deal of healing for me in this piece, because, one of the things I was trying to do with all the voices in the novel was to reflect in a small way, and here she does this on a grand scale, the more than 250,000 dead who will never have a headstone, whose names will never be known, unless they had family. But whole family groups disappeared on this day. The 1.7 million who were left home insecure and food insecure. And so the approach here is collective, is an effort to remember, but there is also healing. And one of the ways that I find the healing, not only in the collective approach, is in these figures in yellow. There are several, but they're mostly around the center. And for me, these are representations of Oshun, or representations of Erzuli. Some people will say Erzuli Dantor, some people will say Erzuli Freda, but the figure, the Loa, who is there to bring about a rebirth and who is there to help a new beginning. And in the novel, I'll end with this. There is a young girl, Tafia, who's 15 years old, and like any 15-year-old is just looking to, have a good time, find a boyfriend, but ends up in an IDP camp, internally displaced people's camp, where she, as you know, happened to many women and young girls, suffers sexual violence, from which she will have a son a year later. And so I want to end with the end of her piece, where she says, "Some months from now, a year that started with the splitting open of the earth, excuse me, and so many deaths, will end with my son born in a tent by the side of a road, in a camp below the broken cathedral, where the market used to be. He will be small and scrawny and will have a good pair of lungs. Sarah will tell me that he reminds her of her son, the one Paul helped to save, but who then lost his leg and died of gangrene. She will say nothing of her daughters. Sarah and Mama will help take care of the new baby, as I'm afraid to look into his face and see his father there. Sonia will say that he reminds her of a child she had wanted but never had, so she will avoid his cries when she can, and wait for word from Dieudonné so she can leave us, all behind. When we used to come to market before 12, we thought that God was watching over us. Now when we walk by the crumbled remains of the cathedral, we know there is no God left, and this is a Christian God, or else he's gone elsewhere. The cathedral is where the big weddings and government funerals took place. I would see beautiful people going in and out, and the building was so beautiful, with its rose and yellow painted walls rising into the sky, and the round windows that made it look like a ship with portholes extended, stranded on dry ground. I had dreamed of having my wedding there one day, when I would marry a rich man and be taken to a house in the high hills overlooking the valley of the city. At night, even then, though, it wasn't so glamorous. There were hustlers and pimps and women walking the sidewalk, but in daylight, it was a fairy tale. Now there isn't any difference between night and day. Daylight is an illusion. I wonder why this has happened to us, not just to my family, but to all of us. This is where we live now. We are in a tent at the foot of a broken cathedral, waiting. All there is to do is wait, and wait. Do's. When something terrible happens to you, it feels like a dream at first. Not until the pain and the panic settle does it seem real. This is what I will tell Didier, my brother, when he returns, and everyone will nod. I see them there gathered, Sonia, Mama, Dieudonné, Paul. They all know. Didier will nod as well. We all know. However it is we will ourselves to move through this, afterward, the terrible thing never goes away. It dims but remains lurking, an uninvited guest, a leech. The more you try to forget, the more it hangs on. One side is scissored to the other, back and forth, conjoined, not able to leave. The feeling uniting dream and pain lasts eternally, but you yearn for the return to a blank space, the in-between suspension between the two before they came to be jointed. You yearn for the sweet, open-eyed innocence, the comforting warmth. And so I think with Constant, there is that scissoring that is happening, the bringing together of the before and the after, and the having to live with this that happened, that I think for most people, for anyone related to Haiti, but especially those who lived through Janvier and even those we now remember, there is a break between the before Janvier 12 and after. And this, I think, helps us to remember, and to also to remember that the gods do watch over us and help us to continue.
And now we're going to invite Gina to share with us some of her thoughts, and then we'll hold off Q&A at the end, okay? After Kathy's presentation, then we'll open up the questions.
And this is also an opportunity for us to be together as a community, and Gina's going to do a performance piece, so we're not going to use any videos or our phones for this portion of the symposium.
We're leaving.
First of all, what an honor. What an honor to follow those two invocations. To hear how a place is written and experiences in that place are transformed into words is a blessing. To walk space right? To move through a landscape, to hear that landscape invoked, recognized, spoken to, with the expectation of speaking back and keep on, is fantastic. So what I want to do is I'm going to primarily talk about that work and that one. And I want to recognize again as well the brilliance of exhibition selection and design, putting them there and letting us be between them. Right? To recognize how they look at each other and how they look across time and space, and to be able to be seen by them and see them. So what I want to do is, again, try to follow along with those processes that we've just had of putting us in space. And so I want us to really think about being in this square area with these banners around us. So again, thank you, Amy and folks, for putting us here, because I mean, it's so much more real. So first, I want us to think about being outside. Being outside. And being outside in a French colonial landscape. Right? And think about ourselves sitting, maybe on market stools, dressed women who work in those places. And maybe it's the Champ de Mars in Port-au-Prince with the National Palace, maybe a church over there. Or maybe it's any town square in the way that cities in the colonies were built in squares with centers of power. The fort, the military barracks, town hall, National Palace. And in the middle, let's imagine in the middle of this, let's say we're in the Champ de Mars. We're in that open space at the center of power. And in the center of that open space is the altar of the nation and the tree of liberty. It's in the center of that green space on that board. The tree of liberty, the palm of liberty in the center of the public area around which people gather. They sit, they listen to invocation, the national anthems, the invocation of God, and they recognize the land and what the tree represents: independence, liberty, the nation, the emblem of the country. Emblazoned in the middle is the palm tree, the tree of liberty, but that is also the emblem of the independent nation of Haiti. That appears on state documents, on national banners. It is, in a sense, the heart of the nation. So much so, recognized as such that when that trade is challenged, as in the U.S. occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1934, those trees were systematically cut down by the United States Marines to take that emblem away, to take that place of gathering away, to change that landscape into somebody else's territory. So you can imagine in that space, in the Champ de Mars, in that town square, the performance of power. Some of you have walked through this landscape today. I know when I got out of the parking lot and I came across the open quad over here, and the ROTC were parading with their guidons. The guidons that are just like the guidons in that work, that Constant frequently uses as her signature on her works. The presence of power, the performance of power, the claiming of space, authority. So, drapeau Vodou, our flags. I came to studying drapeau Vodou more for the drapeau than the Vodou. Honestly, I'm interested in the use of banners and flags throughout in African and African descendant communities in in the Americas primarily, whether it be the bandeiras of Congadas in Brazil, or the Free Huey flags from the late 1960s and early 70s for the Black Panther Party, or whether it's Black Lives Matter banners that are increasingly found around the world. I'm interested in that ritual, that artistry of presence, of empowerment, of protest, of gathering, of recognizing unity, of using fabric to speak truth to power, using fabric or beads and sequins to construct places of power. Also on those squares, those colonial squares, right? Again, the church, the cathedral. So now let's go indoors. Now let's recognize ourselves as being inside one of those places. In the cathedral, in the church. Frequently draped with flags. Flags of nation, flags of hope, for the Virgin, for the saints. To see the history of her art is what I'm saying. The history of drapeau and where Constant takes it comes from military flags. It evokes those. Also the banners in churches, cathedrals. The ceremonial material of Catholicism, to be sure. To be in that cathedral, now we have our pews, we have our seats in there, and we are surrounded by the saints. We're surrounded by the emblems of power. Our Lady of Czestochowa, right? The Black Virgin of Poland, with her scarred face. That either means she resisted Russian soldiers who tried to strike her down, or she resisted French soldiers who tried to strike her down. Either way, she remained marked but present. Right? Focus of worship, of power. Models, again, models for reconstruction. So let's leave the cathedral, and now let's see ourselves in another place with our chairs that you do pick up and carry around in the Unfo, in the temple, as you recognize, as you invoke the divinities, the Loi. And these are the walls of the temple. The Tree of Liberty that's there in the center of the square is now the Potum Matan in the center of the temple. But the Unfo is actually the Champ de Mars. The Laplace who leads the flag parades in the temple. That's a shortening of the term Commandant General de la Place. The military figure who marches the troops. And when the troops gather in the Ville au Camp, the movement, the presence of the troops in the field, right? That's Ville au Camp, where the Loire gather. They are the same places, in different places. So if we're here now sitting in the temple with the Potum Matan, and maybe we've circled it in the same way that we just circled the water, and the way we circled this building, we see likely on the walls of the Unfo, Ezilit d'Anfo, Ogum. Maybe we offer him the Cope Qualité and libations of rum. Constant captures that. She puts us in these places. The banners, they're not flags anymore. They're not murals on walls, but they can take us there. She moves the symbolism, the imagery, the logic of Vodou as a nation within the temple. She takes the emblem, the symbolism of the Haitian nation, and she puts them onto objects, moves them into banners, tapestries, that take that somewhere else, moves it into galleries, moves it into the homes of art collectors, moves them into museums, and makes them as perfect. Now, if I talk a little more about these two, and and I don't have that much, honestly, more to say. I think that the works speak for themselves. But again, this juxtaposition of Catherine Flon with Mother Nation, Mother Goddess, all the mothers. Again, hey, 2 days from now, Mother's Day in the United States. Then May 28th, Mother's Day in Haiti. But between the two, right here, between the two, Haitian Flag Day, May 18th. That's it. That's Mother's Day and Haitian Flag Day. Materialized, manifested. Mother with the nation in the palm of her hand. The Tree of Liberty, the emblem of the nation in the palm of her hand. The mother of the flag, Catherine Flon, the legendary seamstress who took the remaining parts of the French tricolore when Jean-Jacques Dessalines ripped out the white. And she sewed them back together to be the bicolore, the Haitian flag. Catherine Flon, the Haitian Betsy Ross, the first notable flag maker in Haiti, the mother to Myrlande Constant, women who craft the banner, women who craft the flags, women who craft the emblems of identity. But also, we can think about this as other women. Maybe it's Cécile Fatimon, the Vaudou Mombo who helped birth the nation at Bois-Canon, the beginning of the revolution. The flame, right? The flame that started it. The flambeau, the flame of liberty in her other hand. Right? Or maybe it's Myrlande Constant herself, a portrait of the artist. Again, Constant weaves herself into banners as flags, as emblems of the nation. And again, you'll see her little signature flags around the room. Or maybe it's every Mombo with the traditional garments, the red and blue head wrap of priestesses of Vaudou. It's all women, all mothers. The multivocality, the stacking of emblems, of symbolisms, from the military, from Catholicism, from Vaudou, all there. God, I love that flag. I can't not call it a flag. I love that word. And I love that word. And I'm done. Thank you.
It's very, very conversational, very, very open. We can open it up to conversation. But I just wanted to say two things. One thing is, and I was taking down notes as well, we're writing, is this idea of different spaces and places and the ways in which the work kind of animates that. And we saw that with Miriam's kind of taking us through a literary reading, if you will, placed onto a visual text, but also thinking about the idea of the non-linear space. So thinking about the ways in which we kind of exist and exist inside and outside of this space. And I think that this, here we are. I think something like this, this drapeau helps us understand, not only this idea of space and place, but also our being in that space and place. So this idea of the kind of epistemology that I've been so fascinated in Constant's work for such a long time, I think is so clear and was wonderfully brought out in Miriam's presentation. And also the kind of walking around with Gina, the kind of processional, but it's also kind of honoring work, right? We're honoring the work, we're honoring Constant because she is not here. And she's not here, and we miss her. but yet Dina was able to kind of really invoke her presence. So I think that's fantastic and very beautiful, that we can actually think that there is a human behind this. There is a presence and a being. So I'm thinking about some of Patrick's conversation. One of the things that have always excited me about Constant's work is the feminist epistemology that she's engaged in. She does not call herself a feminist. In fact, when Catherine and I were talking to her about that, she was like, stop doing that. Like, what are you telling me? What are you telling me? And I was like, okay, what am I saying, But what I love is in the kind of Black feminist epistemology in particular, she's claiming space. She's claiming voice. She's taking voice, claiming space. And that, in a country that is so filled with turmoil for centuries, is a bold move. But more importantly, in the art world itself, for a Black, working class, Haiti-based woman to claim space, that is also bold. And that is why in my work, in my writing, I always claim that she is a feminist. She's a feminist, even if she doesn't imagine herself, but the kind of work that she's doing definitely evokes that. So those are some of the thoughts that were going through my head as you all were presenting. So thank you so much. So we're open up for Q&A. However we want to have a conversation to the presenters themselves, amongst ourselves.
What I find interesting are the various designs of the frames, with frames on top of frames, as part of the integral part of the artwork. Does she, as she's creating her composition, is she also thinking about how the frame will engage within the composition?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
If I could, I was sort of present through the creation of this work, and so I think that from my experience, Constant is continually thinking about a piece and incredibly determined to it being right for her in the outcome. So this piece belongs to the museum, and when we first saw it, and it was in production, it had a different, this inner framing, some of this was different, and she hadn't stitched everything in. And the next time we saw it, she pulled it out. Her and her folks had pulled that out, and they redid it. And she said it just wasn't right. And so, and then the whole thing was pieced. And when it was shipped to the museum, when we got it here, and in fact installed it for our In Extremis exhibition, it did not have the paquet, or the little packets at the bottom that are not even just evocative, but actual ritual objects that are sources of empowerment. Those weren't on there, and then also the drapery at the top was added later as well, and that was again simply because she had been thinking about it. And when she came to the museum for the exhibition, and we had the good fortune of having less bad fortune with getting visas and such at that time, right? Powers that be. She brought those pieces with her and then installed them on the banner in the gallery. At that time, that exhibition was over there in that kind of corner. And so it was amazing. But the other things I would say is that you can see that she also moves through certain kinds of patterns of tapestry or flag, like the fringes, right? Those are classic for banners and religious tapestries. This is, right? It's a funerary. It's funerary decoration, and so her process is continuing. So hope that makes sense.
Comments, questions? Thoughts? Thoughts that are going through our minds?
I'm thinking about her as a narrator of history, and wondering, with a group of educators in the room, and how they might use this space, especially those who know Constant work well. Sort of, how would you, if you were teaching a class about Haiti's history, what images would you use in this room?
Miriam, Gina,
Well,
others?
I guess I could start the conversation. And one of the reasons I wanted to have that conversation with the novel was because this is such a visual, visceral, depiction of so much, with so many writers, Haitian writers, Yannick Lahames, Mackenzie Ossett. There's so many people who've been working through, what January 12th meant in writing. And we have different iterations of it. But interestingly, this panel could bridge all of our works, and all of the work that's been done, just in one piece. So anyone who's teaching any test on January 12th could use this visual representation as a way to get students, invested in the conversation about this catastrophe. And one of the things I've talked about with different audiences is, especially being in California, is that, California has experienced devastating earthquakes. The engineers who went to Haiti after 2010, used the protocols of California actually to determine which buildings could be saved, which buildings needed to be torn down, etc. Like the tags that are used are actually the California tags. And so, for educators in California, this could be one way, because you own this piece, where they could talk about, the responsibilities that we have transnationally in terms of catastrophes and, the way, and Gina has talked about this in terms of, the false narratives around Haiti. Because there's a way in which people will say, well, that happened in Haiti, it couldn't happen here. Well, it won't happen in the same way, right? That's for sure, because of the infrastructural issues. But the infrastructural issues in Haiti are actually our quote-unquote first world responsibility. Why was it so devastating in Haiti? Because of the U.S. occupation, because of the ways in which, all the issues that have to do with why Haiti is in the situation it is today have to do with everything that we do have. But climate change is happening everywhere. And so the magnitude of a catastrophe is something that will be experienced in places like California. And we also know that the seismologist who predicted the earthquake, Haitian seismologist actually, who was neglected and ignored, has talked about the fact that that break goes all the way up the California, Florida panhandle. And people in Florida are completely unprepared for what will come in the future. So we need to understand how we're related to one another. And so this could be one way that this piece belonging to the Fowler could open up a conversation that isn't just about climate change, but is also about first world to, global hemispheric relationships and what we owe to each other.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah. And I think for me, like, this really influenced me because I was, when I did my thesis film, and now it's a feature of Haiti as a nation of artists, it was at Norwich where they had the earthquake. So I had professors who are understanding because they already went to a big earthquake. So they gave me certain tools that, that it wasn't like, was just such, and I think, I saw the difference of like in Florida, some of the art and film schools wouldn't even let the students go there, but in California, it's a place of new exploration. And we have a relationship since D.B. Peters and a lot of California artists who've had this relationship with Haiti, or even all these, they had, before me, there were other like patient art shows that were there, professors going since the 80s, doing stuff. So I think of having this transnationalism and seeing how she brands and puts her name Constant, and she puts the Haitian flag, so she claims her space. And she puts herself, and I find myself with the Haitian international, I put the Haitian flag, because I was thinking, what's the thing that identifies the culture the most? It's the flag. So these things empower, and it gives you identity, and it gives you history and legacy in a sense. Because now you're attached to something that's 200 years old. You know, you're attached to something. Yes, that's a moment, but she's putting, and I think she's a brilliant storyteller to be able to put all these conflicting images, but put it together that it all makes sense, and you feel like you're being transported. And I think that's the thing you see with Haitian art and us, the African diaspora, like you're being transported to Haiti or Africa through the art. I think especially with her, like it's very clear, you know what I mean, and it's not being filtered. Sometimes I think when we're here, we're like more filtered in a sense, but for her, I think she's is very potent, and she just has a great visual language from voodoo to art to how she's able to put that all together, and like she has a message, for each of her pieces that you could just continue to learn from them, and that's why I try to put where she was building community, and I think she left from the exploitation of a factory to like let me create my own narrative, and I think she's in a sense became, yes, you're in a working class medium, but she's been a flaneur too, because now she's able to travel and show her work and home more. So it's like, yes, her aesthetic or what she creates, but the work that she creates is able to almost like is able to transport itself. Like it was at the Vince Biennale last year. So it's this is like a place where like we need to have those historical memories through our music and through our art, through our films. We need to have that to reconnect you with your community, but to go beyond and to go beyond.
No. I was gonna point to you. I see.
I'm not in a specialty in history like in arts, but I've been thinking when I write about Afro-Brazilian and African arts, and actually for me it was very important to look at, to think about this idea of the gathering, how gathering is so important in constant work, and also what does it mean, right? Like in terms of an aesthetic. You think, oh yes, and I was also thinking about the lesson learned and like how can we think about that as some kind of aesthetic also that is like repeating itself through the diaspora, because it happens that right now I'm writing about this Afro-Colombian artist, contemporary women, and I arrived here and I was like, everything makes sense, so I'm thinking how I can connect like this proposal that she's making around the idea of the gathering, which is like, because I'm actually writing about that, and I was like, of course, like what she proposed about, like we have the work, the live people, but also the gods and everything is there together. It's helping me, like right now I love like to think about these contemporary artists from Colombia. So I feel that also like what I find very interesting is how this work, her work can like travel around the diaspora, also like to help us like to understand, for example, contemporary performance in Colombian arts, right? In Afro-Colombian arts. So I think that for me that's like something that really Sorry?
Who is the artist?
Astrid Liliana Angulo. She's from Colombia, Lilian Cuartas, and Astrid González Quintero. Yes, they are like very young Afro-Colombian artists. Not Astrid Liliana for another generation, but the other 2 years. And I'm also like, I'm thinking in connection with something that Fabiana Lopez, who's an Afro-Brazilian curator, is using like the idea of the gathering also like to think about Afro-Brazilian contemporary performance. So I think that Constant is also like dialogue.
Yeah, so I'm guessing I'm gonna follow. Sorry, what's her name?
Laura.
Laura. I'm Natalia, so I'm gonna follow Laura.
because I'm Brazilian. And as we were speaking, I was like, yes. And when we came here the first time, I could read especially that one banner with Candomblé, Umbanda, or GG, any other Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Indigenous Brazilian traditions, and how, like Madame said, she talked about the Laku consciousness, and autonomies, about how the Afro-diaspora is thinking together in different ways, spiritually, ancestrally, and there's an exhibition on what's not happening now, Afro-Atlantic histories, and I had some issues with that, and then I went to speak with some Brazilian friends who saw the exhibition in Brazil, and they were saying how, yeah, we saw those tensions there, but then we had a Renata Pelinto performance activating the space. So this idea of how the museum space as is not enough, which is something that a number of you have been saying a lot, and the activations like what Myrlande did, what Gina did, we need all of that. And for instance, not to be controversial, but like on the day of the exhibition, it was such a success. The house was full, like when this exhibition opened, and there were some students who did not seem to be of African descent, I don't know if they were or not, looking at yours and saying, oh, I wouldn't want this in my living room. And I'm thinking, is it about your living room? Is it about being there? So what are the mindsets? We can use epistemology, we can use how we enter a space, but how do we prepare our students to experience, see, and read arts that might be different for them, but for some other students, they're going to be at home. You know? So like in Brazil, we have Nossa Senhora Aparecida, who's also Black. I'm like, oh my God, Nossa Senhora Aparecida is right here. You know, so students are going to enter the spaces in different ways. And I think we should try and mediate and honor all of those things, even though it's a huge challenge.
And it's a necessary task, right? Because I think the thing is.
I'm sorry, you said it's necessary or unnecessary?
Oh, never unnecessary.
I wanted to make sure.
Never. At this particular point in time where we are today, because I was talking to Patrick about it, we're living in a world where your feet better be rooted, you better be ready to take stock. Right? We better be taking stock and making some very clear decisions about it's either we want to be and cultivate that aspect of our humanity that is latent, that wants to just keep destroying everything in its wake, or whatever that entails for those people who are willing to take that ride is that we have to face the fact that our humanity is always in question, right? So for me, there's no not doing the work. If you're not doing the work, then you're reinforcing the power that's destroying the need for the work to be done. There's no more neutral zone, right? Right? There's no more neutral zone. There's a lot of people keep wishing there's neutral zone because there's comfort. Like my therapist always goes, well, you know. And I go, well, I'm not that kind, right? I don't want to be that kind, and like they're going through their process. Yes, I understand that as someone who's an educator, and I do want to get to that point about what it means to teach some of this work. It comes with a lot of dangers, right? Because, you know, I'm always very careful whether or not I will bring which Haitian artists I'll bring into the room. Because unless I have prepared the students enough so that I don't have to hear that shit, right? Because that's what it is, poop. You know, I don't, and because you have to, there's so much undoing you have to do in order to get them to see the beauty, right? And then to get to the complexity. Yeah, I think we have a lot of prep work we need to do. What I would do with these is I would kind of focus on motifs, right? I love the fact that there's so much vegetation in the work. I mean, everywhere you go, there's something that has to do with nature, whether it is in abstract motif, or it is an actual plant or root or tree. And, given the fact that one of the meta narratives is about Haiti's deforestation, there's ways to address that. And I don't always come at things with the opposition, right? In terms of like, okay, this is the real history of deforestation in Haiti, because it's reinforcing that. Another way I can come at it is, why is there so many leaves and trees in her work? Like, if you walk through, and that's part of what I did yesterday, and I'm like, every single leaf has all these things. She was thinking about every single line of leaves, and every single leaf, and every single painting, and painting, well, there you go, painting with leaves. But you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that preoccupation with the natural world is not something Haitians have ever been given. We know it. But it's not something that's ascribed to us. It's something we kind of have to fight for, to have as a narrative. So that's one of the things I do.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I teach this, when I teach her work, and I agree with you, Gina, in terms of being very careful about the kinds of artists that you bring into the class or the kind of work that you show, because you also don't want it to be read in a kind of just a singular way. Like, this is a work about voodoo, right? You don't want it to be, at least I do not want it to be that, and I don't teach it that way. I really teach it as part of a creative process of people of the African diaspora. And I always place her work, when I teach my art in the African diaspora class, I always teach her work alongside of other artists to show that, as you were suggesting, Laura, as you were saying, that there is a kind of conversation, a continuum, and also there's a tradition that is very much part of the work that artists do. So first and foremost, I always position her as an artist, someone who is engaged in a creative process. And a creative process that is laborious. It is a process of beading, of sewing, of placing pieces together that may or may not necessarily work. So I always ask students to think about the work, think about her sense of form, composition, I mean, all the things that we do when we teach art in our classes. And that takes them away a bit from the kind of voodoo-ish or even the symbolism, which I'm interested in that, but I also want them to understand that there is thought, there is thinking. And a few months ago, we saw her, Catherine and I saw her in January, we said to her, how do you begin a piece? And she says, I get up in the morning, I'll just, greet everyone, greet the loi, and I start to sing. And then things just come into my mind. So there is a creative process. There is this kind of conversation the artist is having to really kind of get herself centered. And I think to discount that and not include that, we lose the brilliance of her as an artist. Right? We lose the brilliance of her as an artist. So I definitely prepare my students. And one of the other things I do in this and for my classes, I have them read two pieces, and one of the titles coming up in my mind, but it's Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk. And then I have them read Suzanne Césaire work. So we begin by thinking about Black culture and Black production and the possibility and the acknowledgement that Black people create. And then we kind of then go to the art. So they're beginning with a kind of theoretical conversation, and then we get to the art. So that has always been helpful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's some other educators in the room. I don't know if other folks have other ways of thinking. Yes.
I'm just kind of responding to part of the conversation that's been going on. Thanks everyone. I don't even feel like I could try to tackle more than one flag in talking with students. I went to UC as undergrad, and so when I think of Berkeley, from the Bay, but when I think about UC students, we had a lot of Southern Californian students who, they were California residents so that they can somewhat kind of get their financial aid, be in a UC, but then they want to spread their wings a little bit if they can, and which is not happening as much. A lot of undergrads are living at home or being within a certain distance of their institutions. And so I'm wondering, like, okay, a lot of Northerners down here, these are Californians. Yes, they have the reference point of 1989, really young. I was 15 in 1989. And so with Miriam, she'll see his comments. I was gonna like, man, I'm a sociocultural anthropologist and African diaspora scholar, but I was hanging out with a physical geographer earlier this week who's like, this virus is really bad, you know? And I was like, man, you could bring a geography class here, you know, because the way that Miriam was talking about kind of the fragility and the experiences of the earthquakes. I was in a bedrock area of Monterey County when it hit, and then I had family in Santa Cruz County, and Watsonville, which is built on fill, just melted, right? And so I think about housing along the Bay of Gonave. I spent a lot of time in Matissan for my dissertation research and working with women and organizing and livelihoods and just everything that kind of happened, like from 2008 to 2010, and then going back. And so I was in the earthquake, and it is a corpus of material that is trying to get at what for me was very unspeakable for a very long time. And so I saw performance poet Linnell Moise use glitter to signify the dust. And when I saw her, I had recently visited, and the air was still full of dust because people had to demolish their homes themselves, right? So, but I was thinking, yeah, I could be like scientific, geeky, and try to get more STEMmy people and talk about, you know, what happens when your home's built on fill, you know, and how is that house collapsing in terms of not just kind of issues around the materials that were used that can't handle the movement of the earth, but that it was in all informal settlements, right? Port-au-Prince is a popular neighborhood, and you know and to when people try to divorce those neighborhoods from Port-au-Prince and be like bidonville, it's like no, Haiti is more urban, and there are more people living in these densely populated areas making do, you know, and so the corpus of material that's making the indescribable somewhat tangible, the ways we can talk with students who are seeing trees melt, you know, because the ground couldn't keep the water in, and there's all this fragility going on in California, and to relate it to island fragility, it can be incredibly powerful, you know, so bringing in the spiralism for literature scholars and stuff, bringing in people who are interested in narrative, like women's and gender studies folks who are really interested in testimony. It's so rich, and she's such an amazing person in gifting us with that. And even bringing photographers and people, look at what she does with light, you know? Yeah. Everyone should come to this composition, to this exhibition, right? And there's all of us from different disciplines can use kind of, you know, when you have to kind of handhold the analogy to California-centric undergrads, and then like get them there. You're UC too. So, or if it's like someone who had to fill out FEMA, you know, applications who was in Watsonville, you know, because my sister volunteered with farm labor organizations, so I accompanied her as a 15-year-old person, learning about the frustrations and the aid that they weren't getting, right? So there's so many things here. I mean, it's amazing. And then, you know, the remarks about military history and practice and in Vodou and in these flags, you know, that's a whole other module, right? Or a certain class. She gives us so much, you know, and I just feel like I could come and visit this flag many, many, many more times. And hearing Miriam talk was making me think about things that had just been, I'm sorry it takes so long because they're being excavated, right? So this is to be a really generative space. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, as well as about Sunday. I was in Haiti during Jean-Claude's, you know, dictatorship. So for me, I see the Creole pig, but I know it's not the Creole pig. You know, I see Bob Mozambique, but I don't have the same associates, but it's evoking certain traces of things, right? And so, I'm thankful to be here as part of a little member of, you know, that's going to visit you guys as a community, because it's incredibly inspiring. And also, like, I was like, should I talk? I'm gonna cry, you know? Like, it's just so powerful. So, thank you. Yeah.
Do you have time for more conversation? Okay.
I think it just brings students here. Like, I had students come from Pasadena City College, came to my school and they came to see the exhibit, and it was like, they didn't know Haiti created this much art, and just seeing her work. So I think that's another thing, is just showing different stuff. And when my dean asked me to teach a patient cinema class, so bring in the history, bring in, you know, compare and contrast how Hollywood has portrayed Haiti and how Haitian filmmakers and like Haitian artists, and that's the one thing I did like at the Latin exhibition, was showing the difference of how European painters would show the African diaspora and how.
How fabulous is that?
I think we're gonna get started, Kira.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our afternoon session. Stand over here. Take care of the light. We have a wonderful afternoon planned. We're going to start off in here with a presentation from Dr. Kira Malika Daniels, who is Assistant Professor of African American Studies at Emory University. And then we're going to move into the gallery to finish up the review. So without further ado.
Thank you all so much. Honneur.
Respect.
Thank you. First, I have to extend my deep appreciation to Kathy Smith and Jerry Philogene for the invitation to participate, especially virtually. I had another event happening today, but very importantly, it's my first Mother's Day. So I wanted to be home with family, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to present virtually and join you all in conversation in this fashion. I am also joining you from Atlanta, Georgia, which I would like to acknowledge is unceded territory of Muscogee Creek and Cherokee peoples. We honor First Nations peoples as continual stewards of the land. And I will begin my presentation with some visual images that I want to make sure you all can see before I begin chatting away. So can I hear if you all can see my screen? Yay! Wonderful, thank you. So my presentation is entitled An Assembly of Spirits, Divine Multiplicity in Haitian Vodou's Fête International. A chorus of voices about the first Haitian woman artist experiencing a retrospective in the United States. I am very aware that there are so many politics at play here with regards to why there hasn't been one before, but it's very fitting that Myrlande Constant is the first. I'm going to start by discussing a few pieces of Haitian earthquake art. I don't think that it is helpful to us to review or to rehash images of carnage, but I did want to acknowledge the devastation of the earthquake from 2010, as well as our most recent earthquake in 2021. And I think that artists were some of the first responders along with healthcare workers. And I say that because artists are often first responders in times of crisis. And this is a portrait of a manifestation of Guédé in the cimetière, in the cemetery, who has manifested and who has come to bid his worshippers hello and goodbye, right? So those who have transitioned, he's welcoming them into the cemetery, into the city of the dead, and those who remain on the side of the mortal realm who didn't have a chance, many of them didn't have a chance to honor their loved ones or to bury them and to say that final goodbye. So a number of different fantastic representations of the earthquake stand with us. This is a piece by Woody Azor in the Angessen collection. What I think is really fascinating about this piece is that you see a representation of the cathedral. So you see a representation of a cardinal or of a bishop who's present here. So from very early on, there are these representations of the earthquake that portray religious centers at the forefront of devastation. This is a piece that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and Dr. Kathy Smith had kindly invited me to have a conversation with her about séisme, the earthquake piece created by Edwin Alcide, and there are so many different ways in which you see resonances in these representations of graveyards, of pieces of debris on the earthen floor, of houses crumbled. And then you have Myrlande Constant's work. And there are so many things to be said about this work, and I know that several of my colleagues are going to be speaking about, and some of you have already spoken about this piece, so I won't stay here for a very long time, but I did want to touch on a few elements and components that I feel like religious studies lens has a great deal to offer us in our interpretation. So one is this sash. This is not something that I have seen on very many drapeaux. Drapeaux take a number of different types of forms in terms of beads and sequins and different styles of beadwork. We know that Constant has been an absolute trailblazer in the style of beadwork that she introduced in drapeau making. But this sash is really something unique. And it resembles to me the sashes that you might see on cercueil, on coffins. And so I think that even in its presentation, before you reach the finer details of the scene that is depicted, you have the presentation, if you will, of a mortuary art to an audience. And I think that that's something that really must be taken quite seriously. I wanted to zoom in to focus on a few elements here of Haïti du Janvier 2010, noting that there are representations of angels weeping. This is something that Kimberly Patton refers to as divine reflexivity. What happens when the spirits weep and perform ceremony themselves? The angels here could be Catholic angels themselves. They could be Zange. We'll talk a little bit more about the Zange in a little bit. They could be Voix, who are taking the form of angels and angelic figures. But this Masonic symbol of the eye, the all-seeing, omnipotent eye, is one that you see not often with tears coming down, and these almost look like tears of blood. So I think that that's something that's really quite significant. This is a cross here that you see at the base of this particular section, which suggests that offerings have been made to the deity spirits. And so here we have Brigitte, who is the queen of the dead, if you will, and her husband, Baron Samzi, in his sharp tux. And of course, their colors are white, purple, and black, representing life, death, and rebirth or sexuality. But I'll also point out that you have not just these voodoo symbols, but you have somebody who looks like a bishop or somebody who looks like a cardinal as well. And so in this regard, Haitians are so aware of the multi-religious sites that were devastated. And it's very common that you hear people say that, the earthquake did not discriminate against class, did not discriminate against religion, that it took everyone's life and required people to manage to find a new way forward. I think that another component of this piece that really struck me is the multi-layers of different textured fabrics. So here you see there's one threading, another fabric piece as a base, and then yet another piece that almost looks like a woven rug. Really quite stunning to see the visual density of layers just of the backdrop of the piece without even acknowledging the different sequins, beads, and different styles of beadwork that you're seeing on the piece itself. I'll mention here that the borders of this work are all Gédé skulls on the side, suggesting, of course, that this is a carnage, a portrait of carnage, if you will, but that rebirth is still in the frame. And then I want to call attention to this work text within it. They look like tablets. They look actually like a sacred text or like, the 10 Commandments, if you will. And it took me a while to find this in the piece as I was, gazing over it. But it's really quite profound. And for those of you who are looking with us, you might be able to make it out. But I've also written it down here. So, garde la peine. Nous pas qu'à contrôler combien milliers de cadavres communs qui disparaissent. Mouvement séisme mardi 12 janvier 2010 à 4h53. Ça, c'était un gros moment terrible pour l'homme. look at the misery. We can't even count the thousands, hundreds of thousands of cadavers, of bodies of the dead that disappeared. This earthquake of January 12th, 2010 at 4:53, this was a terrible moment for humanity. Having this poem, if you will, this epigraph, if you will, embedded in the text really requires us to regard Constant not simply as a visual artist, but also as a writer and as an archivist. She's really creating a narrative here that is visually viewable, that is visually something to be engaged with, but she also wants you to have those words echo in our mind. So I wanted to point out those components of those Jambian dignitaries. But the more attention that I'm going to focus on for my presentation in the time remaining is going to be on divine multiplicity. And what I'll note here is that for those of you who are familiar with Vodou, and I know many of you are, you might have heard this expression that Vodou c'est une religion qui est 21 nations. So it is a tradition with 21 spiritual nations. And part of the reason that I find this so compelling is because those different nations represent different ethnic lineages from the continent. So you have the Dada nation, which is primarily Dahomian. You have the Peto nation, which is primarily Congo, not just created in the diaspora as earlier scholars suggested. The Nabo nation, which is primarily Yoruba. And the Gede nation, which is coming from Gede peoples of the Dahomian Fon regions. And in recognizing these different families of spirits, we can think about and invoke the notion of Milokan. Milokan is the symbolic representation of all 101 spirits, or some people say 401 spirits, and all 21 nations. And so when ceremony takes place, when the veve, when the sacred symbols are etched on the earthen floor in a mixture of cornmeal and flour to invoke spirits, to invoke the Roi, there will be veve for the spirits who are certain to come. For instance, this is the season of Uzin Zakat and Uzin. So it would be certain that at a Fet Zakat, you would have the veve for Zakat. But in addition, you would need to make sure that you include a veve for Bilokan, meaning that all spirits are welcome. And I place this here for us so that we can recognize that what Constant does in several of her works is invoking the sense of Bilokan. So one of her pieces is actually called Bilokan tous les saints, tous les morts. Bilokan of all of the saints and all of the dead. And I wanted to point out just a few different components here that I found quite compelling. First of all, here in the upper left quadrant, you see that there are 4 drums. Usually in a lot of Vodou ceremonies of the South, you'll see 3 drums, but there are 4 drums here. And you'll notice that an angel touches the shoulder of the drummer. So in that regard, you might understand these drummers to be sacred or spirited drummers. Those who are initiated to the drums are known as untogi. Specifically, a high master drummer is known as untogi. And the word for the sacred drums is unto, which is also the word for the spirit of the drums. And while we recognize that Legba is often saluted first, in fact, even before Legba is saluted in ceremony, unto, the drums, the spirit of the drums is invoked first. So in this portrait of Bilokan that Constant has shared with us, we have different families of spirits, and the last piece that I'll end with will return to that theme again. And some of them are even groups. So here we have our Gede spirits again. We have Baron Sanzi, who's very interestingly light-skinned here. I think that's a persistent theme that I'm finding in Constant's work that's quite compelling. The fact that she has insisted on including Haitians of multiple skin tones, complexions, right? And then we have our good Brigitte with her magisterial hat in the crossroads, in the cemetery, and next to what looks like somebody who has become deceased, and perhaps a spirit rising out. She has several veve that are included here. And then I wanted to draw our attention over here. This is something that Gina Athena Luis has introduced as the Kai Marasa of great importance in the family lineage of Haitian Vodou. So we know that there's the Asson lineage in which people are formally initiated. But in addition to that, there are so many lineages of people where you don't necessarily initiate to the Vodou tradition because it's simply what your family does. And often in these households, you have what's called a Kai Roi or a Kai Marasa, which would be a separate domicile just for the spirits. And it looks to me like this is a kaimagrasa that we have, that people are entering perhaps to salute in the family the spirits who may be taking form of angels here. And so the last piece that I wanted to discuss in the remaining few minutes is l'assemblement sous tout escotio. I found this piece incredibly powerful and moving for a number of different reasons. One is that it was called Last Supper. And we can talk a little bit about the importance of translation because there are so many different layers to this idea of a Last Supper. We're familiar, of course, with the Last Supper by artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, and many different artists have taken and reinterpreted that work to envision what might a Black Jesus look like, what might an Africanization of the Christian narrative of the Last Supper look like. And so here we have Constant's interpretation, if you will, of a table with a gathering of spirits. And I want to point out a few different elements. The border here just is completely filled with iconography. And I think what's so powerful about Constant, like a few other artists, André Piel is another one I would say, is that if you know, you know. These works are not filled with empty symbols, but the iconography of somebody who has deep knowledge of voodoo. So you have, for instance, agouti, which are used for libations. You have plates and baskets of fruits and vegetables that would be offered to the spirits. You have candles. You have which are oil lamps that are used ceremonially, but also historically were used as primary sources of light. You have what looks to me like a bowl of eggs, which would be offered to Dambala. So even the border is suggesting these are the offerings that we give to our spirits. And then here, I thought that I would point out this figure in the center who overlooks the larger scene is quite likely Bon Dieu, is quite likely the high God, capital G. But directly underneath is these VV that have different points of power, point. You could identify them as point. And then a series of VV have been included. This particular VV is for Aïssa, who is the mistress of initiation and the guardian of the Jehu, of the inner temple. And populated around this table are all of these different spirits. And I'm going to point out a few who might be a little bit easier for us to identify. If you look here, we'll see Uzezaka, who is in his typical hat, who has a beard, who has a sickle or a scythe in his right hand and a cup of coffee in his left. He's wearing his classic blue jeans. We have somebody who could be identified as Ligba or Kafu, who has his cane, who's wearing red and black, which are Kafu's colors, master of the crossroads. We have on the right-hand side who looks like Natal, a brown-skinned Black Madonna who has blue and red. And we have who might be identified as Erzefrina, interestingly portrayed as brown skin here in colors of blue and white, although it could potentially be Cleomazine. But there are other spirits here that I think she is including who again require us to do some deeper searching for who are these figures of the 21 nations, who are all of these 101 spirits. So I would suggest that this figure here could potentially be an Uto manifestation, the sacred drum embodied next to the drum. I might suggest that this particular figure in her multicolored headscarf, her mouchoir, and also her dress could be Len Congo, who is the queen of Congo, who comes dancing with multicolored stars, and in some ways is a reincarnation of Oya, the spirit of multicolored skirts. And then you have these women over here who are in the water, possibly in the sea. You see some cowrie shells here. I think it's quite possible that this is actually Mamboruvana, who is a spirit who washes clothes, but not just as a domestic worker. She cleanses a space and cleanses an environment, a temple, and brings in fresh new energy. And so Constant is really requiring us to interrogate who are these spirits who populate our world, those who we're familiar with and also those who we may not hear about as often, but who play an equally important role in upholding the structure of the universe. And I'll note here, Rassemblement sous tout escotio is the title. That truly translates to a gathering of soup, gathering of all the escort of spirits. And here we have to recall Ulysses's invocation of a l'assemblage, a bringing together of things, ideas, spirits, right? And in that regard, I would say that in some ways, it's not the Last Supper, but rather a continual gathering of the spirits. Because the spirits get together, to provide guidance, to provide counsel, to offer assistance and support to their many children in need. And I would say that ultimately this is what Constant is underscoring in so many of her works. The divine multiplicity is where you can find strength in the pantheon of 101 or 401 spirits. And with that, I will close. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Well, let me just say that, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm so glad that you actually reoriented us towards, away from the Last Supper. I don't, I think that, I don't have a whole lot of words that are stringing together to make sense right now. But what I can offer is just thinking about the continuous saga that is Haiti in the moment, right? And the need for us to keep invoking and engaging and continuing. So the title of the presentation and then that reorientation, you asked us to pivot, right? We can still engage with her art historically, right? And thinking about the work, but she's showing us something else. She's asking us to actually think about things in a way that is also very particular to our own social and economic political conditions. So thank you very much for that.
Can I actually a follow-up comment about the Last Supper title? I think that was something that was put on her work later and not something that she titled it.
No, I didn't.
No, I know that you're not saying that, but like if we're thinking art historically about her work, I know that for Jerry and I, something that was really important is to go back to what she has put on the work themselves, because people have often retitled her work.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
so,
Even when you write it on the piece,
yeah.
people let's give it another name. Like
because it takes the work to sort of figure out what she has stitched onto the panel, and so I think that this was actually one of those instances where someone called it Last Supper, but what she has stitched on there is Rassemblement tout. So I think we can kind of throw out the Last Supper. There were other instances. There was a piece that I won't point to, but that the collector had titled it Exorcism, right? That was not something that Constant had titled it, right? And that's what it came in. So you have to always ask, like,
give that context. Thank you so much. And it actually reminds me, I was working on an exhibition, and there were several pieces that were done by Myrlande Jones, who's an African American artist. Some of you might be familiar with her, who went to Haiti, who was very impressed with the work that she encountered in ceremony in terms of the sacred arts in particular. And so she crafted a piece with some Veve for Wu and Veve for Dambala, and she called it Voodoo 2. And in its accession, it was misspelled. And I was like, this is the violence of institutions, right? Because she had done her homework and she had spelled voodoo right. But some of that you're also explaining, it's important to disrupt the archive, right? Is like trusting the artists, right? And then she's providing those texts in the actual work. So that should be our point of departure, right? And even if there's a conversation about, whether she changed or whether it was, added on, but trusting that the artist has included in their work some of the answers to the questions that we have.
Right. I mean, we've said it before that, like, I think she's become so much more powerful about asserting the narrative of the piece, right? Here is the title. This is guiding your understanding. And so, yeah, I'm grateful that you actually led with the title of her work.
Thank you.
I like how she broke down all the diet deities, like how the 21 nations. I haven't seen somebody just break it down. I've heard it, but how she in context, like all the four corners, like, I definitely want to see this again. Just because I think it was a lot of information that, I think even the Haitian diaspora and people, and just the religious context, when you think of that, You know, I think that's really important to see the angels. When you go to mass and you see certain things and where you get your lighting from, that comes from church or that old art, right? So when you see that, you see how she's doing that now in a contemporary sense.
Thank you for mentioning that. And that actually reminds me, I'm so glad in particular you mentioned angels. That was one more thing that I wanted to add, particularly in her, works, Myrlande and Janvier. She includes a lot of angels. And some people might see that and say, oh, like this is the Catholic influence. And that may be true. But in northern Haiti, they refer to the Loire not only as mystère, mysteries, but as anges. Right? That's just another word to refer to the spirits. And so even there, the iconography of divine entities as having wings and looking very angelic could be an influence from, yes, the European iconography, but it can still be a representation of the mysteries, whether they are anges or whether they are lois, known by different names. So thank you for that.
Kira, I really love, it's Jerry. I really love the way that you showed us Udia Azol's work and Evelyn Alcide's work, and then Constant's work. And not that we never ever compare artists, but as I was looking at it, I saw this as if Woody and Evelyn's work were abstracts, right? They were abstract in terms of the ways in which the works were kind of laid out. And Myrlande is more of a maximalist, where it's very detailed, very specific. You have all these amazing different sections. So I thought that was just a visual. It was really a wonderful way you just did that. It's a visual because you can see with the patches are more spread out, so they become thicker and wider as opposed to Myrlande. They're more detailed and more specific. So it just reminded me of something she had mentioned to us, Catherine, when after the earthquake happened, it took her a bit to think about what had happened before she started to create this piece. Whereas some of the other artists that we showed, like a couple of months later, they produced. So it just shows you the different ways in which, and not one is better than the other, I'm not suggesting that, but different ways in which artists engage with work. She's mentioned that she had to sit with it, right? She had to sit with it for what, a year and a day? A year and a day. With the whole what had happened before she can actually visualize it. And some artists in different ways just kind of produced like a week later, a month later. But you also see the differences in that production, the different differences in that artistic production, where one is more of a kind of, let me cover the entire canvas and make the canvas very detailed, as opposed to, let me give you a broad stroke. Broad stroke.
Well, the year and a day, isn't that also what the time we spend and wait after someone's passed?
Before
you go underwater.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that was great the way you kind of, for me, that's what I saw when I saw those other pieces. Yeah.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Jay, and yes, also for pointing out this component of the 1 year and the 1 day has great spiritual significance. That's when traditionally Vodouism would perform the Métier de Monadou, or within Monadou, to recall the dead from underneath the sea, from the Affinine, and bring them into Bouvi, bring them into ceremony, and bring them home, bring them home to the temple. I'm so grateful that you pointed out, that of course we don't compare artists for the sake of saying one is better, but the works that they produced are quite different. And I think you're exactly right to say that Constant is clearly a maximalist, and in several different ways, right? Because it's not just about the size of the work, but the visual density of Constant's work, particularly in Ville Janvier, I think really is in a form of attesting the chaos, right? It's really such a work to behold, because every square inch packs so much intensity inside of it in terms of its visual reach, and the iconic representations are so layered. It's not, it's not random. One might see it and think, oh, it's just a hodgepodge. No, it's not random. Everything is clearly there for a reason, but it will take time to sit through in the same way that it took time to clear the rubble, right? And I know somebody, a dear artist friend of ours that many of you are familiar with, Bonal Edmond, who said that he had sketched portraits of the earthquake for a decade, and it wasn't until the second earthquake, 7.1 magnitude in 2021, that he was like, it's time for me to render this. And so people, that's also, not only, about resources, we could talk about that from an economic standpoint, but how people heal and process their own trauma while rendering it in a visual mode for others to engage with, I think is also part of the conversation.
Other questions or comments? Could we say thank you to Professor Daniel?